Hello, and welcome to 2 Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. Today's tip, bring candy. Over the years, I've worked at a number of trade shows, including the big Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. And if you attend any of these shows and walk around the expo floor, invariably you'll see some vendor doing a presentation to attendees, and then all of a sudden they bring out the t-shirt cannon or the box of t-shirts, and they start tossing t-shirts into the crowd. And then you'll see people who are probably making easily 6 figures in income start climbing all over one another and reaching and stretching to try and catch one of those cheaply made t-shirt advertising vehicles that don't really actually fit anyone properly. It's amazing what people will do when they see the possibility of getting something for free, and especially if they realize not everybody is going to get something for free. You can leverage this too in your presentations. Now, I'm not saying you need to pull out a t-shirt cannon or prepare for a near riot. You can accomplish the same thing with something as simple as small, fun-sized chocolates or Hershey Kisses or other hard candies like Jolly Ranchers or whatever your personal favorites are. Even folks who can't actually eat them because they have concerns about sugar will still appreciate the incentive. Now, whichever type of candy you bring, they should be small enough for you to easily throw across the room without actually hurting anyone. Toss them out as a small reward. Maybe someone in your audience answers a question right, or makes a great supporting point, or simply asks a very interesting question. Candy is cheap, and it's small, and it's a great way to engage the "I want free stuff too" aspect of your audience members' brains. And you can do it all without inspiring riots. Stick around, and after the break, I'm going to talk about a book I read back in May that I really enjoyed and found to be quite valuable. Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about one of my new favorite books, and that is Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. I'll talk about the overall themes I see in this book, and then I'll take a look at some of the key passages and talk about why they matter. I actually read this book back in May and have wanted to talk about it for a while, so I also really like how this book fits in with the theme of my recent cast with the focus on storytelling. It is a beautifully printed book, and I do recommend it. You can actually find a link to it on 2 Minute Talk Tips, episode 26, and on the recommendations page. Of course, keep in mind that those are affiliate links through Amazon, so if you do make a purchase there, I do receive some compensation. Well, I'm going to talk about some of the key points that Nussbaumer-Knaflic raises. This is, of course, still an audio medium. To see her visual examples, obviously check out the book itself, either by buying it or checking it out from a library or finding someone else who has a copy. And if you really enjoy the idea of data visualization, be sure to check out her website and blog for ongoing discussions on this topic. You can find that at storytellingwithdata.com. Let's start by talking about the key themes. There are a lot in this book, but the 4 I want to highlight are: first, prep work; second, plan your story; third, look at your graphs and charts to make sure they tell the story you want to tell; and fourth, take away stuff that doesn't matter. Here's what I see in each of those themes. First, prep work. Nussbaumer-Knaflic talks about one of the key things that I talk about in a lot of my discussions on preparing slides for a presentation. And that's that the first thing you do when you start working on your slides is not to work on your slides. The very first thing you need to do is figure out what you want to say. What is the story you're trying to tell with your presentation? What is the point that you are going to be trying to make? Don't open PowerPoint until you've already done all of your prep work. You want to lay that out. I like to do that using OneNote or a paper notebook. Nussbaumer-Knaflic actually recommends a storyboarding process where you actually work out and sort of sketch out what you want to tell in your presentation. The key thing is to spend the time doing the brainstorming and determining what your message is, and figure that out before you ever start actually drawing your slides. Generally, start working with pen and paper, or pen and cardboard, or marker and dry erase board. Get that stuff done first. Figure out what you want to do, and then building your slides will become a lot easier. Second key theme is to plan your story. You have to understand the data that you have and what you want to get done with that data. It's about looking at what information you have. How does that inform the story that you are trying to tell? And now how can you build that into what you want people to accomplish? And how can you convey that to your audience? Remember, why is your audience sitting there? What is the point of your presentation? What change are you trying to affect? You have to have all of those goals in mind so you can properly plan your story. And then once you've planned your story, you can look at the graphs and charts to make sure that they tell the story you want to tell. Graphs and charts can have a ton of data on them. They can tell a lot of different stories. Part of what you need to do is make sure that that is reinforcing your story, that your story is not getting lost in the clutter of other stuff that's going to be on those slides. When you put that graphic up there, what is your audience going to see when they look at that graphic? What are they going to see when they look at that chart? Are they going to understand the lines and bars and dots and data points? Make sure that you have it designed in such a way that the message you are speaking about is reinforced by what you have on your slides. And the fourth key theme here is to take away stuff that doesn't matter. Nussbaum and Knopfler talks a lot about clutter and reducing clutter. It's about taking things off of those slides that are irrelevant. Maybe that's completely irrelevant data. Maybe that's simply things like streamlining how you label things. Do you really need the grid lines in that image? Do you really need to have the axes labeled in a particular way? Do you really even need a separate key and a separate diagram? Throughout the book, she talks about different ways of displaying the data so that the audience understands it without cluttering it up with a whole bunch of other visual elements. Any extra visual elements on your slides are going to distract the audience from the story you're trying to tell with the data, and they're going to distract your audience from you, the speaker. And we want to make sure, again, that what you put on your slides is not going to take away from the points that you are trying to make, and is not going to draw attention away from you as the speaker. Taking away stuff that doesn't matter is part of the legend of the design ethos of Apple under Steve Jobs, where their goal was to take away things that are going to interfere with the customer experience. Go for a minimal interface. Let the customer do as little as possible to get the result that they need. Simplifying design meant taking stuff away. And simplifying graphs and graphical elements means taking stuff out of them. So those are some of the key themes that I saw in the book, and some of the reasons I really liked it. It's actually very easy to read. She does a great job with how she writes and how she explains things, and I think you'll see that as we take a deeper look into some of these key passages. So I'm going to quote a couple of key things out of the book here and explain why I think that matters to you. So first, she writes, I quickly learned that spending time on the aesthetic piece, something my colleagues didn't typically do, meant my work garnered more attention from my boss and my boss's boss. For me, that was the beginning of seeing value in spending time on the visual communication of data. What I like here is that she's explaining a simple way to stand out. A lot of times we think that our points should just stand on their own. But again, if our points just completely stood on their own, all we would have to do is send out a list of bullet points. We need the speaker to be a part of that. And having your visuals be clearer and more compelling than other people's visuals means that when it comes down to it, your points can stand out better with the key decision makers that matter, be that your boss, your colleagues, or your clients. She breaks up the book this way. She says, I will give you practical guidance that you can begin using immediately to better communicate visually with data. We'll cover content to help you learn and be comfortable employing 6 lessons. 1. Understand the context. 2. Choose an appropriate visual display. 3. Eliminate clutter. 4. Focus attention where you want it. 5. Think like a designer. 6. Tell a story. What I like about this particular outline is that she explains very clearly what she's going to accomplish in the book, and there's actually a lot of overlap with what I try to teach through this podcast. Mainly, it's about starting with some very practical advice that can help you be better right from the beginning. And then it's about understanding that broader context, and figuring out how all of these different elements are going to come together for the story that you want to tell is ultimately what matters. Because as you know how to tell that story and you use the context, you're building the broader picture in which your audience is going to be listening to your content and better understanding the goal that you want to achieve with that. She also says, if you are the one analyzing and communicating the data, you are a subject matter expert. This puts you in a unique position to interpret the data and help lead people to understanding and action. In general, those communicating with data need to take a more confident stance when it comes to making specific observations and recommendations based on their analyses. This will feel outside your comfort zone if you haven't been routinely doing it. What I like about this is that she's again emphasizing that you need to have a perspective, you need to have a point of view about the data you're telling. If you simply throw up all of your data on a slide, your audience isn't going to know what to do with it. You may want them to draw specific conclusions, but if you don't tell them what those conclusions are, and if you don't make it easy to see those conclusions in your data, the audience may draw completely different conclusions based on their own interpretations. This is the data that you have chosen to present. This is part of the story that you have chosen to tell, and you need to be confident with that, and you need to be confident in making a recommendation. Even if your audience ultimately disagrees with you, the very fact that you say, this is what I want you to do with this, and this is why, will make them appreciate your presentation that much more, because you are giving them that key guidance. And that's what they want from the expert. She goes on to say, being able to tell stories with data is a skill that's becoming more important in our world of increasing data and desire for data-driven decision-making. An effective data visualization can mean the difference between success and failure when it comes to communicating the findings of your study, raising money for your nonprofit, presenting to your board, or simply getting your point across to the audience. What I like about this section is that she's drawing comparisons to the way things used to be. Today, we have a lot more data at our fingertips, and we have new ways of looking at that data through advances in Excel and other spreadsheets. More and more organizations are deciding they want to be data-driven. But data-driven doesn't just mean a ton of numbers on a slide. It means looking at data and making decisions based on it. As the speaker, that's your job. And if you can do that effectively, you will ultimately be more successful. And doing so goes beyond learning how to use the chart tools in Excel or the color palettes in PowerPoint. She goes on to say, being adept with word processing applications, spreadsheets, and presentation software, things that used to set one apart on a resume in the workplace, has become a minimum expectation for most employers. A recruiter told me that today, having proficiency in Microsoft Office on a resume isn't enough. A basic level of knowledge here is assumed, and it's what you do above and beyond that will set you apart from others. Being able to effectively tell stories with data is one area that will give you an edge and position you for success in nearly any role. What I like here is that she's calling out the difference between knowing how to use the tool and knowing what to do with the tool. Understanding the data and the way you want to tell your story is more important than knowing which menu options to click on in a spreadsheet or in a charting tool. You have to be able to go beyond knowing those functions that anyone can learn. If you spend the time understanding the data and understanding what you want to do with those tools, you're in a much better position. As another example, I could certainly learn how to use all of the tools in something like Photoshop or Illustrator and figure out where the drop-down menus are for the different layers and for the different effects. But that doesn't mean I would be any good with those tools, or it doesn't mean I would be a graphic designer. Just because I could figure out how to use the software doesn't mean I would be able to tell what to use the software for or when to use the different functions. It's the same way with Office. It's not just about knowing where the different functions are. It's about understanding how you want to use them and how those different functions can help you tell the story that you're going to want to tell. But ultimately, what's most important there is crafting that story. She goes on to say, this may sound counterintuitive, but success in data visualization does not start with data visualization. Rather, before you begin down the path of creating a data visualization or communication, attention and time should be paid to understanding the context for the need to communicate. What I like here is, again, she's emphasizing one of those key themes we talked about earlier, about preparation, about understanding why you're doing what you're doing. Why are you presenting these numbers? Why do you want to create this graphic element? She also says, for live presentations, practice makes perfect. Do not use your slides as a teleprompter. If you find yourself reading each slide out loud during your presentation, you are using them as one. This creates a painful audience experience. You have to know your content to give a good presentation, and this means practice, practice, and more practice. Keep your slides sparse and only put on things that help reinforce what you will say. Your slides can remind you of the next topic, but they shouldn't act as your speaking notes. What I like about this is that, again, it's all about the key things that I talk about a lot in presentations and in slide design. You should never need to read your slides to your audience. They are literate and they can read your slides as well as you can. And if everything is on your slides, if all of your text is on your slides, then you don't need to be there. The audience doesn't want you to read your slides. The audience wants to listen to you. And in order for that to be effective for them, again, it comes down to practice and preparation. Keep working on that. Keep practicing. Keep practicing that presentation to get even better. Your slides are there to reinforce what you want to say. And that's where data visualization comes into play. You can have a great graph up there or a great diagram up there that's going to emphasize the point that you are making as you are speaking. But your slides can never replace you as a speaker. From a real simple standpoint, she goes on to say, the fact that you have some numbers does not mean that you need a graph. And what I like about this is just the sheer simplicity of that statement. One of the things she talks about is using numbers as graphic elements. For example, if you have a simple percentage you want to call out, instead of putting a chart with it or a graphic with it, that's the only thing you need to emphasize, great, put that number on a slide by itself in 100-point type or even larger. And that is what will stick with the audience. Don't make the audience hunt through a line chart or a bar chart for that one figure you want to call out. If you just want them to retain that one number, just put just that one number on the slide. It's going to be much more powerful in your discussion, and it's going to be much more memorable for your audience. Putting a ton of numbers on your slides is unlikely to be effective. She goes on to say, using a table in a live presentation is rarely a good idea. As your audience reads it, you lose their ears and attention to make your point verbally. When you find yourself using a table in a presentation or report, ask yourself, what is the point you are trying to make? Odds are there will be a better way to pull out and visualize the piece or pieces of interest. In the event you feel you're losing too much by doing this, consider whether including the full table in the appendix and a link or reference to it will meet your audience's needs. And there are a couple key things in here that, again, I like to emphasize a lot. First of all, if there's too much data on your slides, if there's just too much stuff on your slides are going to distract the audience from you. And that's not what you want to do. You're also making your audience work a lot harder as they try and interpret everything that's on that table. And that slide just starts to look even more cluttered to them. Further, as they are drawing their own conclusions from examining all of that data, they may be coming up with a different story than the one that you were trying to tell. So unless you absolutely positively need to have that full table on your slide, cut it from there. Other things you don't want on your slides are clutter. She goes on to say, one culprit that can contribute to excessive or extraneous cognitive load is something I refer to simply as clutter. These are visual elements that take up space but don't increase understanding. There's a simple reason we should aim to reduce clutter, because it makes our visuals appear more complicated than necessary. What I like here is the simple emphasis on taking away things that just don't matter, because those things that don't matter are simply making your job harder. They're making your audience work harder. They're making your audience spend more mental energy to interpret your slides. And the harder your audience works, the more tired they're going to get. They're going to be distracted by that clutter and lose the main thread of your story. So if you don't need it, cut it. She also gets into some very practical discussions about what you should have in your graphics and your elements, and talking about lines and colors and things like that. She spends a lot of time talking about pre-attentive attributes. These are sort of things that will go ahead and draw our attention visually to a slide when we first see it. She says, while we work to eliminate distractions, we also want to look at what remains and consider how we want our audience to interact with our visual communications. We will talk briefly about sight and memory in order to highlight the importance of some specific powerful tools, pre-attentive attributes. We will explore how pre-attentive attributes like size, color, and position on page can be used strategically in two ways. First, pre-attentive attributes can be leveraged to help direct your audience's attention to where you want them to focus it. Second, they can be used to create a visual hierarchy of elements to lead your audience through the information you want to communicate in the way you want them to process it. What I like here about the idea of pre-attentive attributes is that we're talking about what is first going to catch the audience's eye, and what shortcuts then the audience is going to be able to use from what they see to understanding your story. And the way you rely on these things, the way you rely on size, color, position, all of that can lead the audience further down your story, or if used poorly, distract the audience from it. Key thing is you have to make deliberate choices about what you do. And she goes on to say, don't let your design choices be happenstance. Rather, they should be the result of explicit decisions. When used sparingly, color is one of the most powerful tools you have. Excel, for example, actually has a lot of different options for color and all sorts of things. And it does some pretty nifty looking default charts, but you don't want to go ahead and let those defaults guide your charts. Make sure that everything you're doing, everything that you're going to go ahead and put on your slide is a result of a decision that you are making. We've talked about this before in discussions about trying not to go on autopilot when you're talking, or about trying not to just go on autopilot when building your slides. The key thing is to make sure that everything you're doing there is deliberate. Don't let stuff happen by accident, because when stuff happens by accident, it may or may not be contributing to your message. If you want to effectively tell your story and get your message across, you need to make those active decisions about what is going to go on your slides, just as you do when you're going to consider the words that are going to come out of your mouth. Color in particular is a very powerful thing. She goes on to say, a change in colors signals just that, a change. So leverage this when you want your audience to feel change for some reason, but never simply for the sake of novelty. If you're designing your communication in shades of gray and using a single color to draw attention, leverage the same schematic throughout the communication. Your audience quickly learns that blue, for example, signals where they are meant to look first and can use this understanding. What I like about this is, again, she's talking about making deliberate decisions about color to make sure you are drawing your audience's attention where you want it to go to better reinforce your story. She goes on to say, pre-attentive attributes are powerful tools when used sparingly and strategically in visual communication. Without other cues, our audience is left to process all of the information we put in front of them. ease this by leveraging pre-attentive attributes like size, color, and position on page to signal what's important. Use these strategic attributes to draw attention to where you want your audience to look and create visual hierarchy that helps guide your audience through the visuals in the way you want. Evaluate the effectiveness of pre-attentive attributes in your visuals by applying the "where are your eyes drawn" test. What I like about this is that it emphasizes how we, again, want to make things easy for our audience. We want to make sure our audience understands the point we are trying to make, understands the relevance of that data. And if we just put it all up haphazardly, they're left to draw their own conclusions, or you're left there trying to describe where they should look on the slide. Using these key visuals helps you teach your audience how to read your stuff and helps make sure they get the points that you want them to get as quickly as possible so they're not distracted by the graphics the whole time that you're speaking. And of course, the title of this book is Storytelling with Data, so she does have sections on storytelling specifically. In citing one of the examples of her seminars, she says, "In my thought exercise, I ask participants to close their eyes and recall the story of Red Riding Hood, considering specifically the plot, the twists, and the ending. This exercise sometimes generates some laughs. People wonder about its relevance or gamely confuse it with the Three Little Pigs. But I find that the majority of participants, typically around 80 to 90% based on a show of hands, are able to remember the high-level story, often a modified version of Grimm's macabre original." What I like about this example is that it very simply illustrates the power of a story and the importance of telling that story. Because while somebody may not remember all the detailed numbers and all the facts and figures, they are going to remember that story. Even a story like Little Red Riding Hood that maybe they haven't read or heard in decades, it still sticks with us because of the storytelling aspect of it. She goes on to say that when you see a great play, watch a captivating movie, or read a fantastic book, you've experienced the magic of story. A good story grabs your attention and takes you on a journey, evoking an emotional response. In the middle of it, you find yourself not wanting to turn away or put it down. After finishing it, a day, a week, or even a month later, you could easily describe it to a friend. Wouldn't it be great if we could ignite such energy and emotion in our audiences? Story is time-tested structure. Humans have been communicating with stories throughout history. And again, what I like here is that emphasis on the power of the story and the way it sticks with your audience. A good story is compelling for your audience. It helps them remember your message and remember the point. If you don't put a good story into your presentation, if you don't tie your themes around the story, they're probably not going to remember those details. Especially a month later, they may not be able to tell anyone what you talked about. They may not be able to remember why they should take this particular action. But if you're able to frame your data, if you're able to frame your goal, if you're able to frame the overall context of everything that you're doing in a great story, then that's something that can actually last with your audience. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this book review. Going forward, I'd ask you to do a few things. First of all, be sure to check out the book, Storytelling with Data. It should be relatively easy to find through your favorite bookstores or through Amazon or possibly even through your library. To learn more about Storytelling with Data, also be sure to check out StorytellingWithData.com. And you can see even more discussions about building graphs and charts and why you should design them in a particular way. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on data visualization yourself? Please share them with us in the comments for episode 26 at 2minutetalktips.com. When you do your next presentation, go ahead and bring a bag of candy with you and see what kind of frenzy you can whip up in your presentation room. And of course, practice your data visualizations and looking at your charts and graphics in a different way, and just try to improve every day. Ultimately, don't get best, get better. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.